Welcome to Lesson 1, IHSS Timesheet Violation Training, Weekly Overtime Violation. In this lesson, we will discuss what causes a violation, weekly overtime, and provide examples of weekly overtime violations. What causes a violation? There are 4 ways that a violation can occur. The provider works more than 40 hours in a work week for a recipient whose maximum weekly hours are 40 or less without receiving county approval. The provider exceeds the recipient's maximum weekly hours, causing the provider to work more overtime than the provider normally works without receiving county approval. The provider works more than the maximum weekly limit of 66 hours when working for multiple recipients, or the provider claims more than 7 hours of travel time in a work week. In this lesson, we will be taking a closer look at the violation for working more than 40 hours in a work week for a recipient without the recipient getting approval from the county when that recipient's maximum weekly hours are 40 or less. It is important to know how overtime is determined. Overtime is paid for any time providers work over 40 hours during a work week. When working for one recipient, if the provider's assigned hours for their recipient equal 160 or less, the provider is not authorized to work any overtime hours. For providers who work for only one recipient with 160 hours or less, to find out if a provider is authorized weekly overtime, divide the recipient's monthly authorized hours by 4. Use this as a guide to how many weekly authorized hours the provider can work per work week. For example, a recipient is authorized 158 hours per month. The provider is assigned to work 39 hours and 30 minutes in this work week. In this scenario, because the provider's weekly hours are less than 40, the provider is not authorized to work any overtime. For providers who work for only one recipient with more than 160 hours. For example, a recipient is authorized 168 hours per month. The provider is assigned to work 42 hours per week in this scenario. In this scenario, because the provider's weekly hours are more than 40, the provider is authorized to work overtime. For more information regarding monthly overtime, please view Lesson 2, Monthly Overtime Violation. Now, let's take a closer look at the weekly overtime violation. We will take a look at 2 examples of violations caused by going over 40 maximum weekly hours. 1. Going over 40 hours in a work week, and 2. Going over 40 hours in a work week that crosses over into the next pay period. Our first example, going over 40 hours in a work week when the provider is not authorized any overtime. The recipient is authorized 140 hours for the month, meaning the provider is not authorized to claim any overtime in a work week because the hours are not over 160 for the month. On the timesheet for work week 2, the hours that the provider entered total 51 hours for the work week. Since the provider is not authorized for any overtime or to go over 40 hours for the work week, this caused a violation to be triggered. In our next example, we look at going over 40 hours in a work week that crosses over into the next pay period. The provider is once again not authorized to work any overtime because the recipient is not authorized over 160 monthly hours. In the displayed timesheet for work week 1, the provider entered 26 hours. However, notice that there are 15 hours in the claims section for work week 1. This means that the provider has 15 claimed hours from the previous timesheet for this work week. Remember, work weeks are Sunday through Saturday. So, in our example, the provider claimed 7 hours on Sunday and 8 hours on Monday for this work week on the previous pay period. When the 15 claimed hours are added with the 26 hours from this timesheet, That is a total of 41 hours for the work week. Since the provider is not authorized for any overtime or to go over 40 hours for the work week, this caused a violation to be triggered. This concludes Lesson 1, IHSS Timesheet Violation Training, Weekly Overtime Violation. Please continue to view additional lessons in the training series to learn more about IHSS Timesheet Violation Training.